Well, welcome to this session on AI's scaling dilemma at the 2025 annual meeting of the Global Futures Councils. AI's scale could not have escaped any of us. It is headline news, the speed with which consumers and businesses are buying into the technology, and the news that this technology is not an ethereal, transparent, lightweight thing. It is built on top of a significant physical infrastructure requiring significant amounts of power, significant amounts of materials, and in many ways changing and straining the infrastructures of nations across the globe. I'm Azim Azhar, I'm the founder of Exponential View, and I will be chairing our session today with our 5 experts exploring the question of how AI systems, as they grow in scale and complexity, will impact the infrastructure that supports them. How that infrastructure supporting them needs to evolve to balance the performance, the energy these AI systems require to deliver the promise of economic growth, while at the same time being more sustainable than they perhaps have been in the past. And that's quite a challenge. How do we build AI infrastructure that scales that innovation, at the same time shrinks the footprint, and can pave the way to a more resilient future, but one that is also net positive? To discuss this, we have a wonderful panel. We have Minister Sina Lawson, the Minister for Digital Economy and Transformation of Togo. We have Janet Goodsall, who is the Dean of the Loughborough Business School, but also the Director of UK Scale Excellence from the United Kingdom. Ali Sejwani, the Managing Director of DAMAC, which is a specialist in real estate and data centers. Kate Callett, the Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Amini, a specialist in smaller scale data centers. And Khalfan Belloul, the CEO of the Dubai Future Foundation. Perhaps, Minister, I can start with you. A lot of what is written about with respect to artificial intelligence is all about huge numbers. It's all about significant capital commitments, enormous projects. You represent a smaller nation. How do you think about matching and marrying the headline numbers that are so large with the capacities and capabilities of a smaller economy?
So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I would say that as a small economy, we have a strategy. Actually, there is a strategy for small countries, AI and small countries. I think it was developed originally by Singapore and Rwanda. Our strategy is really regional cooperation. You know, if you look at Africa as a whole, only 4 or 5 countries can afford to build, you know, the capabilities, national capabilities. All the other countries, meaning 50 other countries or 45 needs to partner. So we need a few things. We need to partner in terms of data centers. We also are facing energy, electricity issue that require partnering and partnerships also. And then 2 other things, talents, for which we need to build a lot more capacity, and the legal framework, because when we say we talk about partnerships in order to build data centers and to host data for AI computing, we need a new legal framework. So we've started to work on this legal framework as part of our continental free trade area strategy. Mm-hmm. But so that's how we should be looking at compute. But that being said, there is a very important issue, which is access to GPUs. As you know, African countries don't have access to GPUs. So that raises another question, which is, will we have access at all to any of the AI compute beyond just the size issue? And I would say that there are new models that are emerging. Some private companies, I think of Liquid Telecom, for example, have a strategic partnership with NVIDIA, and they have a model where they would share, actually build a huge data center, and countries would rent capacity within these data centers. So these are new business models that require different frameworks, and we're working as a continent towards implementing those.
I want to just ask you one follow-up, if I may, there. With the establishment of a partnership with a number of different players, where do you actually start that discussion?
What do you mean by
when you're starting with the discussion with your collaborating countries, do you have a common shared vision as you enter that discussion, or is that something that emerges in your first round of discussions?
Yeah, because most of our countries have either adopted an AI strategy or are developing one. So then the question is, do you have compute capabilities? So that's very early and quick questions to ask. The other thing is that not every country will be able to build the AI data centers. So coming together, Togo has 8 million inhabitants. Our neighbors have 12 and 13. So these are very small economies. And so we absolutely, plus the fact that we do struggle with electricity access and so on. So yeah, that's a conversation that we've been having. Yeah. And it makes sense because we have this free trade area. And initially, when we were signing this agreement, anything pertaining to data wasn't really part of the discussions. We didn't really think through this aspect of collaboration. So this collaboration is really new. And it also raises other questions with regards to building data sets, sharing the data exchange. So we're having all this conversation to be able to be relevant in AI and so on.
Now, Kate, I'll turn to you because you build data centers, but your data centers are perhaps not the ones that people think about when we see the pictures in the newspapers and on TVs. So how do you think about what the role your data centers play and which customers they suit?
So, we didn't actually start by building data centers. We started by addressing the question of data and working with countries to understand what data do you have, in what format is it, and how much compute do you really need? What is the minimum viable compute infrastructure that you need to be able, as a country, to process that data? And that brought us to really think about data center in a different way than a lot of the narrative that has been pushed to us for the past couple of years, where a lot of countries do not have the necessary power, energy, connectivity, and money to be able to build large-scale $100 billion level infrastructure. So in that context, we actually realized that we could build containerized data centers. So think about it as micro compute nodes that really goes into supporting that minimum viable compute that governments need to address the first needs around data sovereignty and residency without actually having to overspend on the investment in the compute. And that goes towards also supporting the local communities. So think about developers who need access to that compute to be able to train those models. Think about researchers who also need access to that compute to advance local research in their countries. And we've now done this in Kenya for ourselves and opened an AI hub a couple of weeks ago in Nairobi. And we've also deployed the large-scale compute infrastructure for Barbados, so for the entire country, from the compute all the way down to the data sets.
Can you help us understand what a minimum viable data center is? I mean, is it one computer and an Ethernet cable coming in? What does it need to be meaningfully useful for the host country?
So think about it as a big, large computer with multiple GPUs inside. But truly is like the question of, for example, small countries. Barbados is less than 300,000 inhabitants, right? You don't need actually a $100 billion supercomputer for that. So really understanding how much data needs to be digitized, how heavy is that data, where is that data sitting, how much storage do we have, or how much storage do we need, but also what are the sorts of applications with regards to research, with regards to national public infrastructure, or public service delivery that the government wants to make, but also what is the developer community here? How many developers want access to that compute, and what will they be using it for? So when we think about minimum viable compute, these are the questions that we're asking the government and the local ecosystem before actually deploying those micro data centers. So it's actually a container with multiple GPUs, compute, and it's powered by renewable. So in the context of Barbados, we're using a combination of solar and biogas.
Right. Now, Ali, you're also building data centers, maybe of a different scale. Can you give us a sense of the complexities that go into building those types of data centers, and how the different stakeholders need to come together?
It's actually pretty simple, funny enough. So our background is real estate. We build buildings and houses, and we entered this business in 2021. And at the time, people we spoke to were saying, you guys are out of your mind. How are you going to go and build data centers? It's why so much technology, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is you need to look for land that has power. Once you find land with power, it is about building a shell, which is a very basic structure. You need some civil works. Costs are not too high. They're around $3-4 million a megawatt. And then you need to go and procure the MEP and the long lead items. Usually when you're doing the data center, we look at it as an infrastructure play. So our clients are the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI, etc. These clients have their designs. They come to you and say, this is my blueprint, this is what you need to give me. You have 1 year to build it. I'll give you a 5, 10, 15-year lease. So it's actually a pretty simple business once you get the reins of it and get the hang of it. The critical aspect of it is actually land with available power. As today, all of the demand is for power available now. If you have lands with power, for all of these data centers, I believe in the next few years it's going to take around 12% of the entire US's power capacity. And unless we have some major breakthroughs such as nuclear, etc., I think that's going to be a major bottleneck pretty soon.
It sounds like we're going to need a lot of Kate's biogas and solar panels to feed all of this. But give us a sense of exactly what that curve looks like when you say it's getting bigger and bigger. What does demand curve look like for the data center you'll be building next year compared to the one you're building this year?
When we started, we were looking at data centers which have a 5 to 10 megawatt capacity. The last 12 the last 3 months, if the land does not give us at least 100 megawatts, we don't look at it anymore. The reason being the clients have changed their mindset. Up to 3 months ago, the clients were saying, they started with saying we need 20, then they were up to 100. In the last 1 month, the big boys are saying if you don't have a gigawatt campus, we're not interested anymore. Because they want to be able to scale very fast. They want to have their operations in a single place. And they want to reduce the construction risk and the risk of completing on time. So it's much easier for them to have one site which you can deliver 100 megawatts today, 300 next year, and then 400, 500 the following year, versus being spread out all over the country and have multiple teams manage the construction.
Right. And 1 gigawatt for sizing is about the output of a modern nuclear reactor.
So 1 megawatt traditional data center would cost you $10 million. A 1 megawatt data center dedicated to AI, so where you're stacking them with the GPU chips, will cost you all in 40 to 50 million US dollars. So when you're talking gigawatts, the investments in the next few years are going to be in the trillions of dollars, not even in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's what you're seeing with the announcements recently with OpenAI, Oracle, and the likes.
Yeah. So, Janet, you're hearing these numbers. and you're thinking about about scale. How, as an engineer as well, by heritage, how do you parse what's going on?
So I come from a country which allegedly at the moment has one of the third largest data center capacities in the world. But when I hear those numbers, then I feel I'm going to fall off my chair. So the UK it is a smaller country, but maybe not as small as Togo. And it does have an AI strategy, and it does view data centers as part of their critical infrastructure. But I don't think we're making investments in centres quite that big. I think one of the problems is there's these sort of data doomsday scenarios about the amount of energy that we're going to require. And actually, I think one of the issues in the UK is if you look at the future estimates for energy between by 2050, they vary. There's a 100% difference in what's actually required. So if I think about it with my engineer hat on, and also from a more of a supply chain perspective, I don't think we necessarily the rate at which it's going to grow. I think we know we're going to need more energy, and for instance, the UK and other countries are committed to try to do that by using sustainable energy. But one of the ways that we can support growth in the shorter term is to reduce the load. So thinking about it, you know, do we need less data going through the pipe so that we can compute less, but also store less? So actually there's a centre within Loughborough University that looks at data decarbonisation. What that would actually suggest, particularly within industrial organisations, that we need to do is actually look at the data that we've got. There's this sort of concept of dark data. It's not the dark web, that's another whole set of data source, but dark data in this context means the data that we have that we don't use. So even think personally, think of your phone, think of your Gmail and how many emails you've got stuck there that you've never looked at, will never ever reference again, or photos that you have stored in the cloud that you'll never use. So that's what we call the dark data. It's stuff that we're storing, it's consuming energy, but it's sort of unnecessary. So sort of data decarbonisation plans would say the first thing that organisations, and I suppose we as individuals could do, is to understand what data we have and whether or not we're actually using it. And then we need to sort of fix the problem, so get rid of the data we're not using and actually work out, not only with the data that we may want to use, but can we add metadata to it? So can we tag it or do other things so that we actually can then, going forward, make sure we optimise the storage by being able to continue to use data or get rid of data when we don't need it. Because in that way, we can actually reduce our consumption for the data that we need in the first place.
So it sounds like there's an optimization that you're talking about, but is it really significant when we're thinking about the numbers that we're hearing from Ali there? Does it significantly reduce the impact of the data center or the compute?
I think there's figures that say something like 65% of the data that we hold we don't use. So actually, if you could get rid of all of that, then I think that could have a significant impact. I also think, if you think about it, perhaps, again, from a supply chain perspective, so yes, data centers are dealing with things like personal usage of things like ChatGPT or Gemini, but actually they're also holding a lot of data for countries or for organizations. And actually, from a supply chain perspective, we used to say that supply chain management is about managing three things. It's about managing materials, cash, and information. And then there was sort of sayings that used to say we can replace our inventory with information. So actually, one of the ways you could perhaps improve your working capital would be to get rid of inventory and replace it with information. But when we've been doing those sort of optimizations, we've not thought, there's actually if you reduce inventory and optimize your supply chains, maybe from a scope 2, scope 3 perspective, you can decarbonize them. But actually, there is a carbon cost to the data too. So I think it's actually about, when we think about our industrial business models, how we run our companies, it's to actually think about, are we running our organization and developing business models where we not only think about the physical goods and services that we provide, but also, and their carbon footprint, but not just their carbon footprint, but sustainability more broadly in terms of water and nature and the likes, but also think about that input from the data side of things too, and then make slightly more holistic optimizations.
Thank you. Now, Halfan, hearing some of this, it made me think a little bit about the degree of uncertainty that any leader faces right now. We roughly know the direction of travel, but we don't know whether it's 3x, 5x, and 10x, or 10x, or between 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. And so how do you think, from your experience, looking into a future like that that is as unclear, how should leaders approach that type of question?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, great to see everyone here, and congratulations for staying awake with us in day one. Usually, given my humble experience with GFC, usually at 5 p.m., especially for the ones traveling from different continents, it's a major struggle. So having you here is a message of appreciation. And to my council members as well, I apologize, I've been slacking off today, but I was in meetings, I promise you. And hopefully I'll make it up for you tomorrow. But again, great to be here with everyone. So I think, to your point, and this is very relevant to us at Dubai Future Foundation, there's always, and I remember when Dubai Future Foundation was first announced, and I'll be very frank, the message from leadership was, you have to be the lab for Dubai. And that was the message from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed. And I'll be very frank, we had no clue where to go and what to do at that time. It wasn't easy for us to benchmark against how to do Foresight, and to your point about uncertainty. We've done a lot of mistakes, we've learned, but we realized that the nature of having an environment of doing mistakes and learning from your mistakes was actually a perfect scenario for us to really institutionalize future Foresight, which we can comfortably say now that we are very close to that. And to your point, at DFF right now, we do have a team that constantly works on Foresight and trying to imagine where the future is heading. It's obviously not an easy job to do, given all the changes that are happening around us, and given the implication of AI and all the pros and cons that can come out of it. There's no simple answer to your question, but it needs to be a perfect blend between creating a sandbox environment, if you will, within the government, which includes a marriage with the private sector, because we all know nowadays the private sector probably owns power and data more than any other government. So it's inevitable that you really create that perfect marriage. At the same time, create an agile and a fertile environment for innovation to thrive, which is really easier said than done. But if you look at the evolvence of our country, sometimes we talk to people that come to the UAE for the first time, and when we tell them the country is 50 odd years, almost my age, I'm slightly younger, but I've gone through the whole journey of the formation of the country. So I've seen the times when Sheikh Zayed Road hasn't existed, and when we were challenging our dependency on oil, all the way to us now sitting in a conversation here, which is not 300 years ago, but it's literally, 10 to 15 years ago, and we're sitting here discussing cyber security and genome sequencing and blockchain and AI. And so this is credit to the structure of the country, but at the same time, we're not saying that we've done everything right, and we have to be very honest with this. But if you look at the portfolio of the most successful venture capitalists in the world, you'd see that 80% of their portfolio went bust. But doesn't mean that they're doing the wrong thing. No, they're doing the right thing by betting and pivoting and learning, and then double downing on the winning bets. And I think you can actually see our leaders looking at the country as a entrepreneurial journey, and as probably with a venture capital mindset. Obviously, with all this innovation, the biggest challenge is not funding. Funding will always come. The biggest challenge is, how do you stay as close to the regulatory needs for innovation? If anyone here would tell me that you can be agile to the extent that you are future ready, I'm willing to challenge you. If you tell me that you are close and reducing that gap, then I'd say yes, because this is what we're doing. Because every day you come up with a policy, 2 weeks later something comes in, and you're playing a catch-up game with innovation. And given the advancement of technology, which is quantum now, and the way it's growing now, given the AI, and given, and we all know we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to AI, because we haven't even blended it with robotics and I mean, sorry for this, but let's take a raise of hands. How many of you use ChatGPT or Grok, or, I mean, raise of hands. Who uses it? Who uses it on a daily basis? Who uses it to the extent that they think there's a human sitting behind you?
I know you're going to say that.
It's to that extent.
Yes.
And we're getting so comfortable with it, and we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to communicating with a robot that comfortably. And this will happen very soon. And countries that really are agile enough to really be ready to switch regulations and adapt are the winning nations. So this is probably a long answer to your question, but I think it's a split.
Yeah, it was a difficult question. And you know, this observation you make about regulation makes me think a little bit about, imagine the country that finalized its AI regulations 2 days before ChatGPT launched, and you know, found it with the world's shortest lived regulations.
Yes, exactly.
We've heard quite a lot about the growing material demand and the sustainability question. And Minister, I wanted to ask you what the internal pressures might be between the importance of collaborating to build out AI, but also the importance of sustainability goals, and what happens as those sit together in the short term and policy needs to be made. How do you balance those?
I would say that we actually do use, so within the Ministry of Digital Economy, we built a team, a data lab, in partnership with the University of Berkeley. And it's a group of data scientists that supports all the other ministries in designing better policies, but using AI to gain more knowledge. So I would say that, for example, if I take the environment, we have made a lot of progress with regards to sustainable use of sustainable farming or forestry and so on, just because we use satellite imagery to have a better sense of what was going on. So I would say that, and same for understanding where we have more water or less and so on. So satellite imagery and the extensive use of satellite imagery over the past 5 years has really changed the way we were designing our policies and using our resources. So that's an example where you see that AI and the use of AI has been instrumental in better policies. Yeah. We also have made quite a fair amount of investment in solar energy. I think that it's fair to say that when we talk about power, we talk about solar energy. For the first time in our history, the continent is really looking into nuclear. I don't know if you're aware of it, that multilateral organizations such as the World Bank and others have decided to change their policies to support nuclear. So it's to tell you that we're moving towards a direction that wants to combine sustainability, but at the same time development, you know.
I love that first example as well of your enabling sustainability policy delivery through using AI, and which I think is a very important set of use cases that we sometimes overlook. And the commitment to solar is interesting because, of course, Kate, you talked about solar, but I want to come to you, Ali. What role does solar then play in the large-scale data centers that you and are building here and people are building elsewhere? Because there is an idea that perhaps solar doesn't have a big role to play in that. Is that correct?
Irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. Solar is irrelevant right now.
I think the only way you'll have some major breakthrough when it comes to energy usage is going to be nuclear. I do not think the other types of renewable energy will be able to create a large impact or even a decent-sized impact, considering the needs that AI has put on the entire power grid globally.
Okay. Kate, you're using solar and biogas.
And
You're-
biogas and
yeah.
geothermal and other renewables. You know, I come from a school of efficiency, so I moved from a school of big GPUs, because I was at NVIDIA before funding my company, to really focusing on efficiency, because in the markets we operate, we have a lot of constraints. You know, energy is not a given, power is not a given, connectivity is not a given. So how do we make sure that we innovate within the limitations of those constraints, and we actually use those constraints as superpower, which now brings the idea of you know, building smaller models that are more efficient, right? More optimized for specific use cases. And I want to say that history is kind of repeating itself, because about 7 years ago, the tiny machine learning movement kind of moved a lot of the processing power closer to where the data is being collected, closer to microcontrollers, which are extremely small platforms. And actually, the 2 largest chapters in the world were in Africa, Kenya and Nigeria. And today, we're seeing this movement again going towards a smaller model with movements like frugal AI. Now we're also calling it tiny AI, edge AI. And just last week, Samsung actually released the tiny AI recursive model,
That's right.
which has beaten a lot of the large GPT-o1 at reasoning. And that model is small. It's a small foundation model, 7 million parameters, highly optimized data sets. So we need to continue pushing for that efficiency. And I feel that we have been lost a little bit in the narrative of building bigger for the sake of building bigger, rather than really looking into what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, and what is the best platform model that I need to use to solve that problem. And the answer might be different than bigger.
Now, this is the most interesting question that we face, this question of AI and scale, and I would like to get a couple of questions from the group, brief questions, in the remaining 10 or so minutes that we have. I want to just, so while you think of what that question is, make a comment to you, Kate, and then come to you, which is, yes, this idea of small models does 2 things. One is that it adds to the policy complexity for a policymaker and someone trying to coordinate what plans might look like, because we've now thrown out an additional type of technology. And it is really interesting that you make the point that you have the data and the computation very close together. So part of the reason why data centers are getting bigger and bigger is actually about a networking, the shunting of data back and forth, which is very, very interesting in itself. But from an engineering standpoint, and I'm sorry I've typecast you as the engineering expert, but what is a good way to think about the trade-offs between the kind of efficiencies that Kate has talked about and the urgency for scale and delivery that Ali has talked about?
So I think, as with all things in life, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, and you've probably got those 2 extremes. So even in, so I'm probably more a manufacturing and supply chain person. I am an engineer, but if you think about it, even in terms of manufacturing, if we start to think about resilience, we're beginning to think much more about things like distributed manufacturing networks, factory in a box. In essence, you've got a data center in a box. We also, again, at Loughborough University, have a CREST center that's done hydrogen modules for to enable, again, in Africa, for people to be able to cook on a hydrogen stove for a school. But it's all within a container. I think we have to remember the whole value chain of data. So it starts with how we create data. It's then how we store data, how we transmit data, how we compute the data, and also how we then measure the sort of energy efficiency and how we report it. And I think what we'll see is, and it will be good, healthy tension, is a competition between those sort of bigger models that may work for some with the big data centers, that are more globally or regionally dispersed, and then some more localized, sort of more distributed solutions. But I think we have to get our heads into where is a lot of that data being used. It is being used in the organizations that give us the things that are critical to life, like food, like energy, like healthcare. And actually, those systems have had data behind them for years and years and years in ERP systems or supply chain orchestration systems. And in a way, we're now adding a layer on top of that, which gives us an ability to perhaps use things like generative AI where it's appropriate. But equally, if you think about something like manufacturing, in the UK, Make UK did a survey of manufacturers. About, I think it was 26% of those manufacturers are using AI, but 93% of those that are using it to support energy efficiency. So these things they're not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And if we start to think of it more as an ecosystem-based approach with different players coming in, I think it will work, but it won't be a one-size-fits-all approach, and it can't be siloed. We have to start thinking of this both as that data value chain, but as part of a broader ecosystem.
Thank you. Now, we should get some questions. If people want to pop their hand up, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I have many, many more to ask. This is, after all, the $10 trillion question, and you've got 5 different viewpoints. Over there. Thank you. Yes. So if we could get just a brief question, would be fantastic.
Thank you. Ali, you mentioned about the energy demands of all the data centers and what's going to happen in the future. But if you look at the top carbon emitters today, technology comes at 11. You've got public transport, you've got energy and all, and just we look at what's happening right now in Dubai with GITEX, with all the things, you can see the pressure that it is putting on the planet with, it's a car-centric city. So while AI is of course going to grow so much faster, should we be thinking of the total impact, total economic benefit of how we can reduce the carbon emission from the other sectors, and then that carbon emission, that energy sources could be applied to the AI side?
You see, I come from a very entrepreneurial, business-driven family. For me, it's about the bottom line. If Dubai as a city needs more cars, I think it should have more cars, and I think it should continue to grow. I think there's an important point that has been missed today, which is in the next 2 to 3 years, you might have an extremely high unemployment rate because of the way AI is changing the world. And for me, that's much more important from a sustainability aspect than the carbon footprint. Because when you have millions or hundreds of millions of people going out of a job, how are they going to support themselves? How are they going to have a living, support their families? And I'm not talking about, with all due respect, very junior jobs which require little training. I'm talking about engineers, lawyers, the entire spectrum. We've already seen it in our company. We think it's going to increase drastically, and we openly speak to our employees about it. We had a town hall last week where we told them, in a few years, we might have 60% less employees in the company. And we told them, you guys need to train yourselves because it's survival of the fittest. Those who adapt to change and learn how to use AI will grow exponentially, and those who do not will be in a severe problem in a few years. And I think that's a big issue for governments to look at on how do you train.
Who's going to throw it back at us?
Yeah,
So,
but you know, you're very plain spoken there about that. I love it. With 3.5 minutes to go, dropping that one in. Minister, I'm going to come to you then, because as the Minister for Digital Economy and Transformation, you hear Ali saying he's had a town hall, he's spoken to his entire employee base. He said 60% of you probably won't be around, and then he said you have to train yourselves, which is perhaps not what a government would say at that point. But how are you thinking about that possibility, and do you consider it a possibility in the evolution of the labour market?
Yes, we do. You know, in Africa, 50% of the population is less than 18, and 75% is less than 35, okay? So we are considering this, and it's funny, you were talking about the town hall. We also are going to have a town hall on the reform of education. The thing is that the speed of innovation, we always caught by surprise, because a couple of years ago we had this project to train people to learn how to code and so on, and now AI does coding better than so really to think through what are so there is reforming basic education to increase math and science, and also to use AI to improve the level of learning and so on. And at the same time, thinking through how to upskill and reskill is quite hard. And so we want to have a process by which we, number one, we have not a town hall, but really a national workshop on education. We think that it's extremely important to start the conversation. Mm-hmm. It's also important to come to forums such as these ones and others to sit and have conversations with regard to what is there to do,
right.
Because it's not so obvious. Everybody talks about reskilling, upskilling, but we don't know exactly, and we don't know the direction, Yeah. At some point, I had a conversation with someone who told me you should tell people to focus on construction jobs and so on, because, if you're a plumber, then you'll still be needed. It was a joke, but it was, part of it was true also, which is that we know that we need to do something, but the jury is still out there as to, what kind of reforms and what kind of skills people will need to acquire within the next 5 years,
Thank you. Now, Khalfan, I'm going to come to you for the last word. We have about 2.5 minutes left, but I know Janet wants to make one brief intervention.
Yeah, so as a dean of a business school working at a university, we've redesigned our curriculum. And so, for instance, all of our students get access to something called Data Camp, and our staff. So it's as important to upskill your staff as it is our students, which is it's a gamified platform by which they can learn a whole load of digital skills. And what I would say is, I think a lot of the work suggests that actually in the future it's human in the loop. It's how I think you do need the digital skills. Someone gave me an example of a lawyer where you don't just need to know law, but if you know law and decision science, you're actually in a really useful position. So it comes to your point about the combination, but I don't think you have to do it alone. There are platforms like Data Camp. If you can give people access to them, they can upskill themselves.
So some of us were hoping to automate the lawyers away. Khalfan, you've got so much experience here. Please, the last words then on Ali's challenge.
Yes. I was going to jump back to it. So, of course, I was joking. The government, of course, needs to play a key role in supporting those challenges, whether through different programs and working, as I said earlier, with the government and the private sector. Of course, from the government perspective, we do have an announcement of having a chief AI officer across all government entities, and went through certain trainings, and they are also pushed to train their people, and their people are pushed to train their people. So this is across the government, and it's there. Clearly having a minister back in 2017 sees how we took it seriously almost 10 years ago. And of course, running different programs to ensure the private sector also benefits from those through the academies that we run. But I'll wrap up by saying, first of all, I appreciate everyone's patience in being here with us today. But I think in order for all this to work, of course, there are different verticals that need to make it happen. One is ensuring that governments are agile. Two, there's the right funding mechanisms across, whether it's debt, whether it's equity, through all the way from the R&D. R&D is massive. And then you have, of course, the seed investments all the way to the debt and equity instruments, all the way to the growth journey. Supporting regulation and agility needs to be there. But the most important thing is what has been discussed. It sounds like a broken record. We mention it all the time. But it's the global dialogue which needs to happen for unification of those ideas, and implementation is much needed on a global basis, more than ever, given the global connectivity of the world.
And with that, the UAE, of course, has played an important role for the last 16 years in bringing people together here to discuss these questions. And even as spending my entire life thinking about these questions, I can sit on a panel like this and learn so much from each of the participants and the intersections between them. So thank you very much to all of our panelists and to the audience.
Thank you.